Is there a desire for you to maybe work for one of the sites exclusively? And what could any of the free sites you work for pitch you to get you exclusively?
I am the Salamonster, and you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish right here on YouTube. And hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this one.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Fresh, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Colin Tessier from WrestleZone. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here. Glad to talk to you.
So, if we take this back to the beginning, where do you first discover wrestling before working in the media?
So my wrestling journey began, oh man, probably the very end of 2007. It was probably around fourth grade or so, so not like roughly 10. And I happened to be scrolling the channels one night and I stumbled on a SmackDown. And for whatever reason, the segment was like MVP and the Great Khali or something. And the Great Khali was like beating him up or whatever. And I was hooked. I don't know. It drew me in. They kept coming back. And I think my first real like wrestling memory beyond that, I think on Raw the next month, the one where like Randy Orton punt kicked Matt Hardy after he had appendicitis.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like I was hooked. And then the next month, like Jeff Hardy diving off the stage, like all these early moments, and then we're off and going. And I've been a fan ever since, really.
Do you remember, and this is going to start the interview on a very downer note, but do you remember the time frame as if it was pre or post the Benoit tragedy?
Post. So this was the very, very end of 2007. I'm talking like probably November. And I think Benoit was probably like June or so, right around there. So and I was a kid. I think I may have like been aware. And then obviously over the years, I learned more about that. But that was kind of just before my time. Like, we're talking literally months of missing that.
Something I am curious to know in that case then is people that I've spoken to about who got into wrestling either pre or during 2007, their parents sort of took it away once they discovered what had happened in the Benoit tragedy. Did that have any consequences for yourself?
No, like for me, I mean, when I was a kid, my parents were divorced, my mom was working all the time. So a lot of times, like it was just me and my older brother at home, and we'd be kind of at our own devices, like watching TV. So, it's not to say like she wasn't there or anything, but like I kind of got into it. And then, my mom may have had like hesitations, but like, even then I don't even know if she knew about that going on at the time. Obviously it was a big story. If anything, it may have been more of the classy, like, oh, it's so violent kind of thing. Because back then it was a little more edgy, a little more like that was the very, very end of the pre-PG era. So it's still pretty bloody, still pretty crazy. So I don't know. I honestly don't know if that was really a concern at the time, but especially like by the time it was really a thing of me being a fan, like, it's already for like probably, that was probably must have been already months in the rear view. So, I don't think that was necessarily a factor, at least in my own,
Memory,
my own
I
like
suppose.
being a fan and my any concern my mom may have had about it.
When we move on in your journey, have you had like a off period at all?
Yes. So for me, it's very weird where probably early high school, so it was early teenage years or so, I just kind of fell out of it for a number of reasons. That was probably specifically the last WrestleMania I really remember watching was WrestleMania 31, and before I said like fell out of it for a couple of years, was WrestleMania 31 or so. And then maybe like over the next year, it's kind of like pulled back and then just fell out of it kind of completely. For a while, I kind of read the headlines, and then I just completely just didn't really keep up with it for a couple of years. And then I once again just like a random December in 2018, I randomly watched Raw, and I don't remember what it was. but I just fell back into it again, and I was like, okay, it was a lot had changed, obviously, a lot of new people, but I was drawn back in, and then a whole like a second era of fandom, and then that really locked me in ever since.
Okay. So if we break down when you stopped, a lot of the fit and high school, a lot of the people I speak to, it's to try and be cool, for lack of a better word. Was that something for you?
I mean, you're talking to a guy that loves comic books and like reads comic books and stuff. And I was not a cool kid in high school and cannot even claim to have been one. There was a time where I wanted to be, and that may have been like part of the reason. I mean, honestly, for me, like at the time, I wasn't in a great place mentally, and like especially with like the way I looked and stuff. And to a degree,
Yeah.
if you're watching it and like you're seeing the Bobby Lashley's and like the Drew McIntyres of the world, and you're like, well, look at me, like I don't know. There's something about that was like, this is not doing great things for me. And at the time, I think that was a factor. And then just I don't know. I just I remember like one of my peak eras of the fan year was like 2011 with CM Punk, and then The Rock and Cena, some of the big stuff like that. And by the time it was like WrestleMania 31 or so, I felt just a little, not to say there's a drop off, but like I don't know, there's something just that, or maybe I was like kind of frustrated to some degree, but a number of factors probably kind of contributed to that. But and then by the time that I came around again, like wasn't as much of a concern, and especially wasn't concerned about being a cool kid. I'm like, I'm gonna like it, or I'm gonna like it. I don't really care if it's cool or not. Like by then, I fully embraced being a comic book fan, so let alone like getting into wrestling again. I'm like, if it's cool, it's cool. If it's not cool, I'm still gonna like it regardless.
Fair enough. So around 2018, how do you get into the wrestling media? Is it when you stumble back into it, or is it
Yeah, so
are
no,
they
it's
sort
very
of
funny.
simultaneous?
It was pretty much simultaneous. I happened just to randomly put it on, to put like be watching Raw. Um, it must have been like, if not the Christmas episode, like right around like late December, because I was home from school on holiday break. By then, that was my sophomore year of college. So I got back into it, and I very passionately, I watched Royal Rumble. I got back then it was still the WWE Network, so I got that. I was like fully back into it. I was watching that every show. And then I was a writing major back then. Actually, no, I think I was at first journalism, and then I switched to writing. So more on the sports journalism side. And then February came around, and I just very like, you know, happenstance. I was very fortunate. WrestleZone was hiring, and I was a journalism major. I was writing for the school paper, covering sports. Hated it. I was not happy covering that. Like I was covering like volleyball and basketball. Like I don't care. Like it's not what I want to be doing. I had always thought I wanted to cover football, and then I didn't enjoy being the journalism major, so I switched to wrestling, or sorry, I switched to writing. Switched to
Can you
writing.
imagine if that was amazing?
Right. So I switched to writing. Then I was doing more of like entertainment side of things, movies, TV shows and stuff. And then February rolls around. I've just gone back into wrestling, and then wrestling's hiring. And I was already outside of the paper. I was writing for some websites about comic books, about comic book TV shows and movies. So I had some experience, and then again, wrestling was hiring. I read wrestling when I was a kid. It was like my go-to website when I was a kid, WrestleZone. So then I was like, hey, that's cool, because I started using them again when I got back into it.
Ooh.
And I happened to see like the listing that they're hiring. I was like, why not? Right, let's take a shot. And here we are, call it 3 years later, literally over 3 years later now. So yeah, I was very fortunate. I started as a I think it was just a nighttime slash like Sunday news writer, and I've fortunately been able to climb up ever since.
So what is your official title with WrestleZone now, and what does your job entail?
So now I'm the senior editor of WrestleZone. By my boss Bill Pritchard is the managing editor. So basically, like he's at the helm for the majority of the day, and then I tackle like covering. I'm on at night, like afternoon, evening, and night. So I cover the shows, namely, the TV shows. I oversee the writers underneath me, the news writers underneath me. I edit them and kind of work with them to make sure things are covered. Those are obviously the two big things, and then like I kind of I post things to the Facebook page. I live tweet during the shows as well. I have done stuff on the podcasting side, like the weekly review shows for the
Mm.
Raw, SmackDown, etc. Lots of stuff like that. The name was coverage, and then corresponding with the news writers, making sure things are covered, and then kind of filling in as needed. Like we have a pretty small team, so it's you have to kind of step up and you make sure things are covered. If there are gaps in schedule, or either starting early or working later, like just making it work and doing whatever you can to kind of help out the team in any number of ways.
You talked about in the beginning sort of being the sort of starting at the bottom in some ways as the weekend writer. Is there anything you miss as you've got further up in the chain from being maybe lower down?
I mean, for me, it's easy to say time, right? I mean, for me specifically, I have 3 jobs right now, so free time is not something that I have a lot of, and that's of my own doing. So I would say that's probably one, having a more loose schedule, and I have a very flexible schedule, and I'm very fortunate for that. I can start early and stuff like that. Like I can, things. It's flexible in that sense. I work from home, which has always been great. Even let alone with the pandemic happening, but like this has always been work from home. So that's been very, very fortunate as well. So no, I guess that's my own doing, right? If I had just the one job, I'd probably have more time. But then wanting to really make a living out of wanting to be in wrestling media, and being very fortunate to have other opportunities as well. There's the downside of like not a lot of free time, right? One job is shift based. One job is actually I have 2 shift based jobs. One's more a little more flexible in that sense, a little more like responsibility based, for lack of a better word. So I guess that would be my answer. Well, like if you ask me, like, what do I miss? But no, I enjoy what I do. I love what I do, and I love having responsibility. I always wanted it. Like I worked very, very hard from the start, working later or trying to do as much as I possibly can. Is just the way that I am. Because I always wanted to do more to be where I am now, essentially. It's like when I was just a weekend news writer, I would try to do more and get more responsibility. So then I went from like the weekend to more of like afternoons. I did mornings for a bit. I was working like more and more and kind of just climbing that ladder a little bit. And I can't always say I miss anything in that sense. I like having the responsibility that I do. It means a lot to me, and to have earned it, and to know that I have that trust in me. So yeah, I guess for me, it's time, right? But like this is only so many hours of the day. But again, I've probably really done that to myself more than anything. But I am where I am, and I'm very fortunate to be there. And then again, I'm very fortunate to love what I do. So yeah, I wouldn't change a thing in terms of like going back to where I was or anything like that.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And with your schedule being so busy, especially on a weekend like this, I do appreciate you taking the time to do something like this then.
Yeah, I appreciate having the opportunity to be on. I mean, this weekend specifically is crazy. Like they're kind of like peak weekends like that, like WrestleMania weekend or WrestleMania week all week long is crazy. There's literally like 5 interviews with every person on the card for WWE or whatever. And there's a media day today, so I've been just listening to a bunch of interviews all day long today. And stuff like that. But like, you do what you can to kind of carve out a little time in your schedule. And this, I was happy to talk to you. So it all worked out. And yeah, it'll be a fun weekend, but it's definitely going to be a busy one. So that's how it goes.
If someone is maybe currently the weekend writer for a wrestling site or just a site in general, and they want to move up, what is some advice you would give them? Maybe something you didn't do that you were given that advice yourself and you're like, I wish I'd followed it. And then maybe something you did do that you're like, don't make the mistake that I made.
I mean, I've definitely made mistakes in general, but for me, I have thankfully been successful. Again, like I said, just literally doing anything I could to go above and beyond. At first, to make a good impression, to say, hey, like I want to be here, and then as I continue to enjoy what I do, doing what like not necessarily to say you have to work late, but like trying to just do anything you could to go above and beyond to prove like I am an asset, I am valuable. It's like when you're starting, if you're just weekend writer, that's very helpful. If you want to do more, to kind of show that you have that capability. For me, sometimes that's even back then, like writing stuff that doesn't get published right away, but it's kind of in the queue. So it's like, whether it's an interview that's not super timely, that's something that can be used the next day, or if it's even more less timely, throughout the week, if it's like just something a little bit of an evergreen thing, just trying to help and just go outside of your like assigned hours. No, like there's plenty of people that probably work, they say, I don't know, what's it, like a 9 to 5. They start at 9, you end at 5, you're done. For me, I would either start early or end late, or try to be more proactive and more productive, even when like during those hours, to make sure that there's more. If you like stick to a strict quota, it's like, oh, I'm gonna do 5 articles, whatever it might be. Just doing that is one thing. For me, it's like doing literally just whatever I could, not worrying about necessarily the numbers, but it's like, if I see there's something to do, I'm gonna do it. If that means going over that quota of a number, I mean, that's really all I can say. It's like, for me, I'm fortunate. I went to college. I was a writing major, so I write journalism and writing, like partially journalism. So I have that kind of foundation. Work ethic and just working hard really has been half the battle, really. And then all it takes is like getting out opportunities and making the most out of them. That's all I can really say. You asked like, if there's anything that I would recommend not doing that I did. The only thing I would say is just like try and, I mean, things obviously change, but like if you're pursuing something, like focus on that. There are times where like I'd be pursuing something and then something came up and it would kind of get derailed a little bit. And like that may have, not had a great impact on things, at least at that time. And again, thankfully now it's all kind of worked out. But like try to have a goal and like work towards that goal, whatever it might be. Ideally, a more specific one. And if it's like for a specific place, that's one thing. If it's more general, it's up to you. But yeah, in terms of advice, the best thing I could say is just like, it's all about working hard. Like it sounds really, really simple, but I wouldn't be sitting here otherwise. Like, it's just, I work hard, and I've been thankfully rewarded for it. And thankfully I've been given opportunities for it, and I'm very, very grateful for. Because again, working hard and putting in the work and ideally doing a good job, like that's really all, like the biggest parts of it.
You spoke about wrestling in a job sense a lot. So has the fandom gone away a bit since you've been working in the media?
There are, I mean, we talked about the timeline earlier. Essentially, I got back into it, and then maybe two and a half months later, it was work. So it's like I couldn't really gauge how much of the fandom was there. Like, I got back into it, but then it quickly turned into work as well. And I would say there's been peaks and valleys. Like, there have been some rough periods. The height of the COVID era was pretty rough, like the Thunderdome and stuff like that. Like, I don't think we can sit here today and be like, yeah, that wasn't peak content, right? Like, it wasn't wrestling as we all know and love it. And thankfully, it's more normalized now. Back in the crowds, have been for literally a year now. But I don't know. There are peaks and valleys. Like, for me, one thing that really helped was when CM Punk came back. Like, he was my guy when I was a kid, and watching him live, like, just such an electric moment and stuff like that. Is it like having those people that you still get attached to? Like, Johnny Gargano came back, and I loved him in NXT. So having him come back, and I was like, having those little like surges of like, hey, that's really cool. There have been periods, like, I would say the fandom definitely dipped throughout last year, like seeing WWE release a lot of my favorite people. Like, I was a huge fan of Malachi Black, Aleister Black at the time, Bray Wyatt, like seeing stuff like that, all the rounds of budget cuts and being like, this is like rough. And then you have to cover it. You have to like be in the midst of it as it's happening, right? And then other stuff like there's like the speaking out movement was one thing, to seeing some less not great people or allegations about people. And having to cover that kind of stuff as well. Yeah, that's not great. Just for general like enjoyment of wrestling itself, it puts the business in a different light.
Yeah.
I would say it ebbs and flows, right? I would say for me, not to sound like a mark or anything, like AEW, I didn't really like AEW at first, but I really came around, I would say, last spring, and I really became a big fan of that. And then seeing CM Punk arrive there and all that stuff, really getting attached to that, like that was how I wanted wrestling to be. And like being able to say, okay, I can enjoy AEW more. And then at the time, WWE was struggling in some ways. But now since Triple H took over, I think it's been a lot more exciting. So that's been helpful as well, where it's like, then that way, it's like when you have to cover Raw, the previous regime wasn't always the most enjoyable thing. There are certain problems with the product, but I think it's been a lot better recently. So yeah, it ebbs and flows, right? And I would say I think that'd be true regardless if I was working. But like for me, it's always like it doesn't always matter if I enjoy the product or not, because then I can say it is work. But then when it's great, it's great. So it's really that's kind of how I guess I tend to look at it.
I know exactly what you mean. But if you got to the point where you were getting no enjoyment out of wrestling whatsoever, would you have to be like, I've got to step away just to maybe find that passion again?
That's tough, right? I mean, especially for me, again, I'm fortunate to be where I am. And my goal at the end of the day, always, I mean, I'm engaged, I'm getting married next year. So it's
Oh,
like
congratulations.
thank you. So my goal is always like, I have to take care of my fiance and to like take care of us. And she has a job as well. I'm not like, it's not like I'm, if I left my job, we'd be entirely screwed. But like that would not be great. Obviously, we have an apartment now. We want to get a house. So having goals like that, it's like it makes it hard to contemplate like just leaving entirely. Just like I don't know if it got to the point where it was like proactively like bad, or if it was proactively like having a bad effect on me. That's I don't know. I would still probably look at, as I said, Indigo. It's like that. If it got really bad, I would say it's work. Right? You don't always have to love what you do. I'm fortunate to, like I
Yeah.
said, even with ebbs and flows, I still am a fan, so I enjoy it. And then I guess I would just kind of hope that we could come back around again, right? No, it was like it is that balance of I am a fan, but it is work. And at the end of the day, like you got to work, right? So like,
Yeah.
thankfully, I haven't seen that so much myself. Where it's like I've always gotten some enjoyment out of it as I've been working. If WWE was rough, that's when I got into AEW, and that really helped. Now WWE is better, or at least better to me, and that's helped as well. And we'll wait and see. I will say something that's come up. People have asked me like, "Oh, aren't you burnt out or anything?" Because again, right now I do have 3 jobs, all within wrestling.
I was just going to
So
ask you a few questions about burnout in a minute, if you don't mind.
no, so just to start it, for me, it's like I've had 2 jobs for like actually technically like 2 jobs for probably over looking at my calendar over probably almost 2 years now. I've had 3 for uh call it like 2 months now. I started the third one pretty recently, but I would say if I was going to get burnt out, it would have happened by now. And that may seem like I'm jinxing myself, but like I'm already doing the same things. I'm watching wrestling all the time. I'm covering wrestling all the time, doing all the same things, and just to a different degree. And like I don't know. I feel like it's been a good test, and now I'm like I can do this. And starting the third one, that was a concern, but it's been the same in terms of like it's not it's hard, like it's a lot, but at the same time, it's like I'm not burnt out because I do enjoy it, and it is important to like to have I have 2 days off, thankfully, and to the extent I can, with exceptions, obviously, if the team needs me, I gotta step in. It's what I do. But the extent I can, especially on like not this weekend necessarily, on a normal weekend, I can say, okay, I'm not working Saturday. I do work Sundays, but so then taking those days you have off, completely getting away and doing whatever you can, just kind of to recharge a little bit. That's been very, very important. But no, thankfully, even despite all that I do, not burnt out yet, knock on wood. And I would say I've had a good chance to test that, and it's working out so far.
Fair enough. I imagine you talked about getting away on your days off to avoid burnout. I imagine you don't watch wrestling on your days off.
Yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
to the extent I can, and it may sound weird, but like working as much as I do, it's like I need to get away because otherwise I will get burnt out. It's funny. I joke like Impact Wrestling's on Thursday nights. I'm like, oh, I really want to watch it, and I'm like, I can't. Like, I really watch it live. If I can, I watch things like on delay, like the next day. Like I have Sling, the TV app, so I'll record it for WWE. If I'm not covering it, I'll probably be covering Clash of the Castle this weekend. But if I'm not covering an event, if it's on Peacock, I'll watch it the next morning, unless I'm like actively covering it. And I'll try to like dodge spoilers to maximize enjoyment, but like that's what I need to do, because like otherwise, then it's every single day, every day of the week. It's like that's when you really start to run into trouble. And given the amount of stuff I already do, yeah, and like so, yeah, it may seem weird, but like that's my strategy for like just trying to prevent burnout as much as I can. Like if I can avoid it, and those days I have off, like I try to be really off.
Yeah, totally. Have you put anything else in place to avoid burnout, or is that your main thing?
I think if people that know me could probably tell you that like I don't have a good work-life balance. Like, so I don't have enough measures in place, being honest. I do start early. I do work way too late for my own good sometimes, because I try to get it all done. And again, that's why the situation I put myself in. I'm very fortunate to be where I am. But there's that cost of like, no, there's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot of 3 a.m. nights, maybe a little later, getting up and not getting a whole lot of sleep. Um, so if to spin it on advice, I would say like, yeah, you should probably like try and have more boundaries in that sense. But for me, like that's been the biggest one. It's like the days I'm off, I really say like I gotta be off. There are times where it's like, someone says, do you want to do an interview on your day off? I'm like, I can't, man, like I can't. Unless it's like really, really needed. Obviously, like that's if I'm needed and like I need to do it, I'll do it. No questions asked. That's what I do.
Yeah.
But to the extent I can, like that's my one kind of safety measure. It's like if I'm off, I gotta be off, because otherwise I am gonna probably go crazy. So then I do take some breaks during the day, probably not enough, but like I take a dinner break and like get away for a little bit during the day. But yeah, being honestly, I'm aware that I don't have enough measures in that sense. And again, there are pros and cons. It's probably one reason why I am where I am. And at the same time, like can be a little rough sometimes.
You talked about not having measures in place, but it also being maybe the way that where you are where you are. Do you think if you hadn't been almost all in on doing as much as you can, you would be in the position you're in today?
That's tough. I think for wrestling specifically, I started it, like I said, I was a weekend writer, and I would always try and go overboard in terms of helping as much as I can, filling in as much as I can. And then I guess like it was both situationally and also through my own work. Like we had our senior editor at the time, Tyler, got another opportunity, so he left, and we needed somebody to not replace him, but to have that role.
Yeah.
And of the people on the team at the time, again, because I did what I did, because of the experiences I did have, it was probably a good candidate. So thankfully, my boss Bill gave me an opportunity. So part of that was again being all in, working as much as I could, do as much as I can to help. And then it turns into, you asked about the other two jobs. It's like, I don't know if I necessarily needed to go all in with them to the extent that I have, because again, trying to go all in for 3 different places is challenging, and that's what I try to do. I try to do my very best with everything I'm doing. I started, so just to be specific, I started as an editor with Sportskeeda in December, like late November / early December of 2020. I was an editor there for roughly a year, and then they gave me the opportunity to be the senior editor there for the content improvement team. That was this past January. And I always went all in, doing whatever I could to help them in the similar way as WrestleZone. Whether that was going above and beyond work hours or whatever was expected of me, trying to do above that. And then part of it was, they decided they would have this content improvement team. They wanted another member on it, because I think it really had been just my boss, Vishal. He was kind of running the ship there, and they wanted someone else to be there. But now we have a more of an established team. So I think it's a combination of work and opportunity. And granted, in any case, I could have said no. I could have said I just want to stay where I am, but I always wanted to do more. WrestleZone with Sportskeeda, and then this in July or so, I was very thankfully given the opportunity to work for Fightful, and that was a place that I always wanted to join. I really respect the team they have there, and already having 2 jobs I did, I just kind of was like, I don't know if that's going to become a thing. And then thankfully, my friend Robert works for both Fightful and WrestleZone, said, you should give it a shot. I
Robert
did.
DeFelice by any chance?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, what a guy.
He's great. So thankfully, he said, "Hey, you should like out of the blue one day." He was like, "Hey, you should work here," and I was like, what do you mean?" I was like, I have two jobs. Like things are going well, and but I think we talked about before. Where I was like, "Hey, wouldn't it be nice someday maybe to get there?" And he's like, "You should try." And I was like, "Hey," at the end of the day, like you asked me earlier for advice. Half the time, you just gotta take your shot. If you have the work kind of to back it up, if you have the experience, as the classic saying goes, you miss the shots you don't take. I was like, yeah, I might as well try, you know. And then thankfully it worked out, and I'm part of the team there now, and I love it. It's a great team. Um, and I part of so I moved there. I started as the nighttime writers. Basically, I would have my shift at WrestleZone, and it rolled smoothly into my shift there. But then I'd just go above and beyond as much as I could because I wanted to do more. And thankfully, it worked out where I've been doing more there. Um, so no, it sounds, I don't know, for me at least, I found that doing as much as you can, going above and beyond is kind of the recipe for success. And if you can do it, if you can, you know, just work as hard as you can, with boundaries, obviously, and not driving yourself crazy. And it often works out. It has for me, and I'm very fortunate for that. But like, I can't speak to otherwise because that's the road that I've taken. Because I do think just the work ethic and helping as much as you can, or helping doing as much as you can, and just trying to go above and beyond, and in a number of ways. It doesn't have to be one specific way. It's whatever it might mean. It can often make a lot of difference.
Fair enough. So one thing I am quite curious to know is you work for probably three of the biggest wrestling sites out there. Are there many differences between maybe how the teams work, how the process for submitting stuff is? Basically, what are some of the differences between working for all the three sites that you've noticed?
I would say there's a lot of overlap in some ways. Obviously, they are inherently different. I would say Fightful sometimes covers like the whole spectrum, right? They
Mm-hmm.
well, independent wrestling, like we got a great coverage of Japanese wrestling, a lot of stuff like that. The whole spectrum. I would say sometimes like, you know, and that's great. And over wrestling, maybe we have a very good spectrum as well. It's WWE, it's AEW, Impact, New Japan. Like it's still a spectrum, but maybe to a slightly lesser degree because there's only so much anyone can do, and we kind of focus on that because like at the end of the day, you know, so there are some sites that specialize in independent wrestling. That's all they do. But then if you try to do every single thing that's out there, there's a lot of wrestling out there, right? And so you have to kind of prioritize, like, okay, we got to look at like,
Yeah.
what's really like the major stuff, and then the stuff that we can kind of do on top of that. Great. And then with Sportskeeda, I would say the main difference for me, I'm fully an editor there, whereas wrestling and Fightful, with wrestling, I'm a editor slash writer, and wrestling writer with Fightful. With Sportskeeda, I'm an editor, senior editor, so it's more on that side of things, and
Mm-hmm.
that is inherently different. So I would say by and large, there's a lot of overlap. You're covering same interviews, same shows, same topics, for lack of a better word. Um, yeah, but like I would say, each site has its own philosophies, its own kind of preferences, but by and large, like there is a lot of overlap, and that makes doing the three more feasible. It's like if there are probably other websites that function entirely differently, but by and large, it's like you're covering shows, you're covering interviews, you're covering news as it happens. And maybe it's done some different ways here and there, but by and large, like the wrestling news is wrestling news again to varying degrees. And then I think all these sites do it very, very well. So yeah.
What is there a desire for you to maybe work for one of the sites exclusively? And what could any of the free sites you work for pitch you to get you exclusively?
Tough question, my friend. I don't know. I mean, someday I'd like to not be working three jobs and be able to have a little more of a normalized routine. Maybe someday. I love what I'm doing now. I'm very fortunate to be part of three great teams. I don't know what they could pitch me specifically. I would say what I'm doing now is it's working, and like I said, my goal really is my fiance and I would want a house, so I really am trying to to meet that goal, and then maybe seeing how things are after that, and maybe trying to figure stuff out. I don't know. I for now, I would say like I love what I'm doing, and I enjoy being a part of all three teams. Um, but yeah, it's tough because like I'm attached to all three. I love all three, and it's just maybe at some point in the future, maybe doing one. But for now, I really enjoy it, and at the end of the day, I have to do what's best for me and my family, and again, my fiance and the family that we hope to have.
Yeah.
We want this. We want to get this house. We want to have I want to make sure we have the life that we want. And I'm very fortunate, and at the same time, like looking forward, there may come a day where I have to do what is best and trying to figure whatever that is. I don't know. You asked me today, I don't know, and that's part of the journey that I'm on.
Fair enough. I know that's quite a big question. So
no, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer, but I will say I do love what I'm doing now. I'm very fortunate, and we'll see what the future holds.
you talked about good questions there. I am very curious to know about like your interview prep, if that's okay. Like, how do you go about getting interviews? Is it the sort of thing where you are my process, which is sliding into DMs and emails, or is it where your site will reach out to you and say, we've got this interview with whoever, do you want to do it?
I would say for me, it's a combination of both. At first, I was very, very reluctant to reach into DMs and email. Like, oh, that was a little weird.
Preach.
Because, like, for me, I was some wrestling fan that got a job, and then I started. I didn't do interviews at first. I was just doing the writing, and I did more of the podcasting. Then I started doing interviews right around the same time. So at first, like, I was. Before Ring of Honor went on hiatus, I was like, Ring of Honor was my beat, so I covered Ring of Honor for WrestleZone, and then I started doing interviews for them, and those came about namely because it was like a company, they have a more of a PR team, so their PR guy at the time, Mark Kruskal, great guy, so he reached out to me and my boss Bill, and he would say, hey, do you want to interview this person, this person, this person? We would set up that way, do it through him because he was kind of that's what was his job, and then. Since then, especially since Ring of Honor went on hiatus, and then now they're under new ownership. Now I've been more focusing on trying to do maybe some independent wrestlers to the extent it's possible, or NWA has kind of become my new specialty in a lot of ways because Mark, the PR guy, has done some work with him with NWA. So kind of some work where he's reached out and said, like, for both Always Ready in June and NWA 74. He's kind of been the go-to of like, he'll say, do you want to interview X, Y, and Z? Or we'll say like, oh, maybe he'll give us a list and we'll be like, we want this person, this person, and this person. I've reached out to a couple people via email or DM. My favorite wrestler is Matt Cardona. And I think the first time I interviewed him was through email. This was probably last October, first time I interviewed him. I emailed him and he has a lot of media, and thankfully he said yes, and I got to interview him, which is one of my very personal highlights. Like I loved Zack Ryder when I was a kid. It's like going to talk to him now all these years later, and him being on the run that he has been on was very, very cool. So that was an email. I've gotten a couple through DM. That can be a little less of a success rate because some people who's this person DMing me? Like
I've noticed that as well.
Yeah.
Like, have you noticed with interviewing, and this is completely changing the subject, but have you noticed it comes in like, it's like a rainstorm. It either hammers down or you're getting none at all.
Oh yeah.
That's something that I've noticed.
With NWA, like I was very fortunate. I got to do, I think like 5 interviews the week of, or maybe the week before NWA 74, where we tried to like kind of, it was mutual, like they wanted interviews, we wanted interviews, so it's mutually beneficial. So I think I did 5 interviews, just myself, people on the card, and people like attached to NWA. And so it was like a rainstorm, but then there are times like, especially after Ring of Honor went on hiatus, that was my my stream, right? It's like I was doing Ring of Honor reviews,
and it became a bit of a drought, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I started being like, okay, there's a GCW show. Let me reach out to people on the card, and sometimes it'd work out, sometimes it wouldn't. Uh,
Mm.
I think sometimes people like having the company like Ring of Honor or NWA, that makes it a lot easier. It's like, oh, we want this person to talk to you rather than saying, hey, I want to talk to a person, right? Because it's
Yeah,
entirely on that person to respond. So that, and they're all very busy, very busy people. So no, I definitely works like that. At least to a degree from what I've seen. And when it rains, it flows, and sometimes it doesn't always do that. But kind of like I was saying earlier about fandom, it usually comes around, and then you'll be able to get some interviews regardless. Again, maybe a dry spell, but usually comes around.
I asked you to give advice earlier for writing. What is some advice for some young interviewers that you would give?
I would say prep is very important, but also not everything. There are times where it's an interview, and sometimes I won't do like a whole lot of prep if I'm very familiar with the person, of what they're doing or like their background. Like Macarona, I was like, I know all about this guy. Like, I know what he's doing, and I know what's going on with him. That was when he just started doing his GCW stuff, and I was following that very actively. So I did some prep. I'm familiar with him, what he's been doing. So it's less kind of strict in that sense. There are plenty of interviews where like I don't really know who I'm talking to. Like specifically, I know the name, I know the person, like I know like about them, but to know like enough to really get through an interview well and to have to you want to sound like you know what you're talking about. So even if you
Yeah,
don't, if you want to try like you do, fake it till make it. So for me, that is just research. You mentioned research earlier. Um, so for me, that's their match list things, or look on Twitter what matches they have coming up, or look at previous interviews and
I was
don't
going to
don't
say
like
cage side seats is normally my friend if I'm interviewing.
they're a good one.
Uh,
Yeah, there are a lot of websites out there. So just look at previous interviews and then don't pull from the same question, but like say they said this about this. How can I spin it so it's different? Because you don't want to be asking the same questions. That's not fun for anybody. So I would say prep's a big one. For me, honestly, like I have anxiety, so like it can be a little nerve wracking sometimes talking to a complete stranger. Even now, I've been doing interviews probably over a year now, and it can be kind of scary sometimes. So just trying to like keep calm the best you can, and just like at that point, kind of just focus on the question or focus on trying to get to it in your head. Um, a big one. This goes back to college. My brief time as a journalism major, it's like don't focus too much on the questions because then it sounds very rigid. You want to listen to what they're saying. Don't
yeah,
look at your list of questions. Like I have to ask every single question. If they say something that strikes you, if you want to be listening, roll with that. Then maybe you don't ask every question. But it's more organic. It's more of a conversation. You don't want to interview to be a strict question and answer necessarily. You want it to be a conversation with this person where you show them you're listening, and then it's better for I would say better for the listener, better for the quality itself. If you're listening and you're flowing as a conversation rather than they say something and they're like you say something completely unrelated, it can be a little like audibly jarring. It's like it doesn't flow as well, and it's still a good interview. But to have the best one, I would say I try to keep it more flowing and like I listen to what they're saying, and that could just mean a transition. Speaking of X, or maybe you lump in a question you wanted to ask by addressing something they said. In the perfect world, they set something up and you get to ask what you want to ask anyway. But sometimes the conversation goes a different way and you don't get to ask something, and that's fine. Ideally you ask your major questions, maybe you don't ask some of the left ones. But I would say that's a big one for me. Just having a conversation flowing. And then like sometimes I guess it depends on the person, right? Maybe especially actually I would say no matter what you can listen and roll with it. But sometimes like if you want to stick to more strict interview, I mean it's all about style really, right? So to
yeah.
each their own, and ideally it's kind of a compromise of the two. But that's some of my big advice. And the big ones also, like I said, that research is important not only for the familiarity of the person, but also like you don't want to ask them the same questions because you want your interview to stand out to the best you
Yeah.
can.
Speaking of listening and things of that nature, have you ever had a moment where it was like, okay, I had a question, but you've said something really interesting there. What has been that moment for you where you were like, we were going to go one way, but we're going to go this way now?
It's hard to think like specifically. I think I was talking to Trevor Murdoch, the NWA World Champion, head of NWA 74, and we were talking about one thing. Maybe not so much that I was going to go one way and he went another, but like we were talking about his title reign or something, and he brought up like Matt Cardona or something, and I was going to ask about him like later or something like that. Then he brought up, and I was able to very like naturally flow into that. Where it's like maybe, like I said, I kind of had this outline of like we're gonna talk about his reign, we're gonna talk about '74, and maybe like look back to Cardona being like, hey, what do you want to face Cardona at some point? But because he mentioned Matt Cardona, and I could say like, oh, you brought it up, so let's roll with that. It's hard to think off the top of my head of like a specific instance of like zigging and zagging of like going a completely different way. Yeah, I'm struggling with the exact example. That's the best thing I can think of where it's like, you kind of have a game plan, but things kind of don't go off the rails, but like you can't plan how like it's exactly going to go. So to that point, being flexible, it's like, again, not sticking to like how you think something's going to go within the interview. Just again, listening and kind of rolling with punches. And for me, that worked out. I still got to ask the question I was going to. It just kind of shifted maybe the order a little bit.
Fair enough. Before we move on to my final couple of segments, I'm going to ask this. Maybe I'll be embarrassed, maybe I won't. But any feedback for me as we've been talking for about 40 minutes or so?
No, like you're clearly listening to what I'm saying, and I don't know. I think it's flowing pretty well. We're talking. No, like you're like I said, you're. It feels like you're listening and addressing what I'm saying, and like you. An important thing to do to the extent you can. If someone says something and you kind of like say it yourself or like phrase it as part of your question, like you talk about this earlier, or you bring up this, or like kind of it's that response and that flow, and you're doing that. So no, I all good. Just, I think it's going well. I would say you're doing a great job.
Thank you, sir. Because I'll admit, like, I've found you really like looking up to you as I've been doing research and stuff, and it's like, wow, this guy's really cool. So it has been really fun
Oh,
chatting with you, my friend.
thanks, man. I appreciate it.
So,
I don't. This is the first one I've ever done this. I'm always on the other side of the equation of interviewer. Like, so I don't know what to expect. But I'm having a good time. So I appreciate you taking the time.
do you? I know it's only your first time, but I struggle when I go on like, other people's shows to talk, uh, not about myself. That's the wrong word, but like to be the center of attention. Do you like that, or is it like no?
No. Like I said, I have anxiety. I'm a very shy person, which is ironic. Again, I've done a lot of stuff on the podcasting side. I do plenty of interviews, but it hasn't really gotten necessarily easier. Maybe like easier compared to my very first interview over a year ago, where it's like it's less nerve wracking necessarily, but like it's still like a little stressful. It's like a little worried. Like I remember there are times, a lot of times I'll do less so on the interview side, I'll do a podcast, like the Raw or SmackDown podcast or whatever. And a lot of times I'll partner my broadcast partner, John Clark, or there are plenty of times where the schedule doesn't line up, so I'll do it myself. There was, being frank with you, it was WrestleMania week and it was very, very stressful. And I think John was at Raw. He goes to a lot of shows in person, so I was like, I got to do the show myself, which is great. It's fine. He goes, he has a great time, and this is the way it works. So it was, I think, one of the podcasts that week, I was already like pretty stressed, pretty afraid. Like I said, WrestleMania week, so much to cover, so much to do. So I was already like, pretty stressed out. And on top of, being anxious and stuff, like I was on the air and I had a panic attack on the air. Like I literally, like, I couldn't breathe. Yeah,
oh, wow.
It was very scary. And I had to like quickly sign off, and then I had to like say something on Twitter about it because like, it was very clear something was seriously going on. So then, thankfully, I got help for it, and like it hasn't happened since, thankfully. But no, that like
oh wow.
To answer the question, there's still that layer of I do not like the center of attention. Like it's, again, this is the first one I've ever done of these. I'll happily do more if I got the opportunity. But like,
so when I asked you, was it like, oh no?
No, because like you being asked is different than being in the moment, and then like I don't know. And so, sometimes like I'll have a show, I'll have an interview, no problems. I feel fine now. I'm all good. Something about that one day just was not my day.
You don't have to discuss it too much if you don't want to, because I know it's a very personal issue. But have you put anything in place when you go on the air now to avoid panic attacks and things like that?
Um, not really. It's hard to prepare slash like to have measures in place for me. Ideally, and like I said, ideally I'll be on a show like with somebody else, so I could like. It's hard to if you're doing a solo show, you're carrying it yourself. You gotta like just talk, and like for me, the anxiety it's the breathing. So it's like it's hard to like really focus on breathing and like and breathe when it's just me. I'm the only one talking. If I have a partner, I can kind of get on a question if it's acting up a little bit, and I could be like, let me breathe for a second. Um, but yeah, like there's not a lot you can really do. And for me, like the time that's happened, the extent that like it's a full panic attack, it's usually very out of the blue. Like I had one, the one that happened on air. Ironically, I had an interview earlier that day, and it started to happen, and I got through the interview, and I was okay. And then whatever, just the again that specific situation happened on the air during the podcast later that day. But like I couldn't have necessarily foreseen it. I thought like it kind of acted up to a lesser degree. I thought it was okay. But it's very hard to plan for. I've had like a couple just in the past couple of years to happen out of the blue. I think WrestleMania week was pretty crazy, but I couldn't have predicted that would happen, right? So now it's like
No.
I do podcasts, I do interviews, and like I did like several interviews. Like my breathing acts up, and I just tried like to power through it. If it happens again, we'll see we'll see how I deal with it. Because it's not great to have it happen like live on the air or live during a recording like that. Because if you're doing an interview, usually it's a Zoom recording, and you can't really like hide from that. So no, I don't know. Maybe I probably should have measures of some degree. But for me, like when my breathing starts to act up, I try to kind of like to be mindful, slow down, and be like just trying to like get through it best I can. You know, that's really all there is.
Fair enough. Like, I'm sorry if that was too personal. Like, I was
No,
just very
I'm an open
curious.
book. I'll talk about this stuff like no problem. Like it's who I am. But yeah, like if it happens, I just try to breathe and like get through it. Uh, yeah, because like at the end of the day, like no, there's nothing to be freaking out about. Like and like in the moment that you're having a panic attack, it feels horrible.
Mm.
But like if I get nervous like ahead of time, I'm like it's like I'm just gonna do an interview. It's not a big deal. It's gonna talk to this person, and then do it right. So yeah, honestly, I probably should have more measures than I do. But by and large, just like I'm going to do this, and we're going to hope it works out.
Fair enough. As we look at wrapping this up, my friend, because believe it or not, we've been talking for nearly an hour. We're going to do a very quick segment I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite theme song, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler of all time. Basically, questions that I'm sure they get asked on social media quite regularly. And now they'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Go watch this, so they don't have to answer them again. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Gotta say, I'll do like a 1A and 1B. 1A would be CM Punk and John Cena at Money in the Bank 2011. I love that match so much. I love that build. That was like an amazing time. And very, very similarly, The Rock and John Cena at WrestleMania 28. The once in a lifetime when it was once in a lifetime. That was amazing being a fan. Like even back then, I like The Rock was past my time like as a wrestler. Like he had left the business before I got into it, and then he came back. And it's but knowing like who he was and seeing like knowing who John Cena was, that was electric as well. And of course they ran it back next year, and that wasn't as great. But at the time, man, both of those were absolutely something else. I look back on them very, very fondly. There have been some others as well. Like the most recent example of a match that like really, really blew me away. I would probably say Kenny Omega and Bryan Danielson at Grand Slam. That was awesome as well.
Were you there?
That was no. Unfortunately not. It's hard. That's a double tangent. It's hard to sometimes like to go to shows when it's my job to cover them.
Yeah.
Especially like I'm on at night. I'm on like I pretty much other than Thursday. I'm on every night of the week, and I literally now at the time I did now I do play-by-play coverage for Dynamite. I like literally write up things as they're happening, whereas usually I'm like to the news results, so it's not every match, but it's hard. It can be hard to do that. Would have loved to go to Grand Slam to see that, but I do love getting to watch it on TV. I do like having the commentary and being able to really get the atmosphere through the TV like that. So that's definitely another example as well.
Fair enough. What about favorite pay-per-view of all time?
Off the top of my head, I would probably say All Out 2021, if only because Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole showing up was really, really cool. Like that blew me away. And CM Punk coming back, that's probably like the recency bias answer. Trying to look longer, again, because of the matches themselves, I would say Money in the Bank 2011 for Punk and Cena, and WrestleMania 28 for The Rock and Money in the Bank, and then WrestleMania 28.
I know what you meant. Yeah.
For Rock and Cena for that one. Like those definitely stand out. And I would say thirdly, WrestleMania 30 with Dan Bryan winning the title, Brock being the streak and stuff like that. That was a great show that stands out to me as well.
What about favorite wrestler's theme song of all time? Should I prep people on these questions before?
No. Like they're very fair, easy questions. It's like it's hard. Like, I have a bunch. Like for me, top of my head would be "This Fire Burns" from CM Punk back in his WWE days. It's on my Spotify playlist. Tommaso Ciampa's "No One Will Survive." Love that song. I was so sad when they took it away. The one he had in NXT. Those are two big ones. I don't. Something about it is like I vibe when it comes on. Bryan Danielson's AW song where it's like the Flight of the Valkyries and it drops.
So do I. I really like it for some reason.
Yeah, that's good. Those are two big ones. Yeah, I would say I'll probably say those are some of my favorites.
Favorite tag team?
FTR. All the way, man.
Oh, 100%. Off the top of his head.
Oh, love those guys. Like I used to not like love tag team wrestling, but the stuff they've been doing, and then also seeing the kind of people they are, and like they do interviews, and you can tell like they're just two really good guys. No, they're awesome. I guess the last like year or so, that's been my 100% answer. Like absolutely FTR.
Unjust that they're not in the game, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. There'll be DLC, it's fine. You know.
Yeah, but that's not the point. That's a whole nother conversation. And then finally, who is your favorite wrestler or superstar of all time?
I gave it away, so my number one answer is Matt Cardona. When I was a kid, like Zack Ryder was my guy. I was like so hyped when he won the US title, that like the Ryder Revolution back in the day. And then as I said, then I fell out of wrestling, and then not long after last year, he had this great run he got sidelined a bit with the injury, but the GCW title, NWA title, so awesome to see him having that run. Like I was really upset when he got released. But then knowing like he wasn't getting used very well, so to see him having this great run, and then I've got to interview him to hear him talk about having so much fun and being so successful. Absolutely great. CM Punk, another one. Controversial, yes, he's a controversial guy. But like some of my favorite matches and promos all time from him. Bryan Danielson, another one. Absolutely big fan of him throughout his WWE career and now in AEW.
He's my favorite of all time. I'm just going to say
amazing. He's absolutely great. And I would say another two, because there's so many good wrestlers out there now. I would say Adam Cole, huge fan of his, and I loved him seeing his work in AEW and in NXT as well. And also MJF. Again, another controversial one, but like that guy, unmatched on the mic, and I miss him, and I hope he comes back soon.
We'll know by the time this goes out, because this is going to be an interview that I not sit on for a while, but like I have content in the can, so I'm going to be completely honest. Do you think he'll show up at All Out?
I think so. I think he kind of has to. And by the time it comes out, I could be entirely wrong. That's the way wrestling goes. But like, I kind of thought he might show up in Dynamite this week, just kind of give a big.
So did I.
Not that they needed it, but like I thought that would have been a good time. Because if not All Out, like I guess they could wait for a full year. But I think All Out will be a good time. Maybe it's the world title match, but like I think it's been long enough. I know it's been a very like messy situation, all this stuff around Double or Nothing, like. it's not a good look, obviously. Like it's been a lot, and who knows exactly what's going on. I have no idea.
Again, we might know by the time this comes out.
Right. So hopefully, I would say hopefully he'll be there Sunday at All Out. But regardless, hopefully he comes back soon because I think he's definitely a benefit to that show, and I enjoy watching.
Me too. So as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general. We're all sort of gonna live forever in some sort of very, very weird way. So what is one piece of content from your good self that you want the good people to check out? And then what is one that you're like, if you could avoid that, I would appreciate it.
I mean, honestly, like my first interview with Matt Cardona, like just that is like something I kind of hang my hat on because of how much it meant to me. And he was at the point he was at in his career, like really just getting on at the height of this real run that he was on. That was what was my favorite interview just in general. I've had a lot that I've enjoyed, but that was definitely one. I would probably point to that one specifically. And I'll remember exactly when it was, but like it was a Raw post show on the flip side to avoid the Raw post show. It was the week of WrestleMania this year. That's the one where I had the panic attack. So like maybe don't watch that one if you want to see me like content creating. Maybe don't look at that one. Not that I'm ashamed of it, but it's like it's not wasn't my finest hour or anything. So those would be my like top two answers. I've had some interviews that like haven't been my favorite, but I don't want to name the person. That sounds like I'm blaming them. It's just like there have been some interviews that I may not recommend, but like I stand by all my interviews. I've always like I'm proud of all of it and thankful for all the opportunities I've had to do interviews. But yeah, I would say definitely very happy with my Matt Cardona interview, the first one, and also on the flip side, maybe not that podcast where things went off the rails a little bit.
Fair enough. And as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you and or your content?
So always on WrestleZone, all the new stuff there. I'm on the afternoon / evening and night, so find me there. If I'm on in the early afternoon and also on late at night, so go find me there as well. For the podcasting / interview side, stay tuned to WrestleZone, YouTube and stuff like that. Interviews come in, as you said earlier. Sometimes it rains and sometimes there's a little bit of a dry spell, but it always comes around, and there's plenty in the archives as well. Lots of great stuff. So that's on the Wrestling YouTube. For me, socially on Twitter, it's at CT_2110. Want to give me a follow? Feel free. If not, no worries too. That's totally coal. But yeah, those are the biggies. I don't like. I try to be active on Twitter. I don't do a whole lot like otherwise. That's what I am. But yeah, those are the best ways to see me / my the content that I create.
It's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash. Follow bodyslam.net wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube for my show of Cassidy Haynes, the Wrestle Watch Pod, and follow the Wrestle Watch Pod on Twitter to help us pick the match that we're going to watch every week. And I will see you in the next one.